Okay, well, thank you again for taking the time out today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for talking with me.
Yeah. Mhm. Okay, so I wanted to get started asking about the development of the film overall and what really maybe inspired you to make the film and how the whole process started overall.
Yeah, it goes back to like 2015, I think it was. I was finishing up a previous film and looking for, future projects, and I came across an article kind of about this whole story, and I was fascinated by it. It really, to me, read like a movie. And I knew of Will Vinton. I knew him from the mustache and the characters that he created, like the California Raisins and the Domino's Pizza Noid. Those were characters that I grew up with. And so when I read the story, I thought I'd like to pursue this. And so I reached out to Will that day and got an email back from his assistant, who I found out later was his wife. And she said he'll meet with you, but he's not really interested in doing a movie. And so I thought, oh well, I'll take that chance. And so we met up and had like a 3-hour coffee, and I thought we totally hit it off. It went great. And a couple days later, he followed up and said, "Yeah, I'm not really interested in doing a movie." And so that was kind of it. But we stayed in touch, and about 6 months later, after just continuing to have conversations, he came around and said, "All right, let's do it." And then from that point on, he was great. He was totally an open book, gave access to everything, introduced me to people, and couldn't have asked for a better subject to make a movie with and about.
Once he decided to go ahead and work with you on the film, what was that experience like of getting to work with him and getting to know him better, and maybe also what kind of research you did into his life overall as well?
Yeah, I mean, research just everything that exists. I feel like I
Mhm.
found and was able to use, whether it was online or just finding stuff. I worked with researchers, but he was great to work with, and first and foremost, he was just really kind of a down to earth, normal guy, and so I found it easy to get along with him. And then as far as the film, he is though a pretty private person. So, my job was to try to open him up more and get him to talk about things that maybe he would rather have just avoided, because he was very positive. He'd rather not focus on anything that's negative, but those were things that needed to be discussed. So kind of getting those things out of him. But I look back at, some of my favorite experiences were just the things that weren't even making the movie, where I'd go to his house maybe and leave the camera in the car, and he'd take me out on his boat and we'd just go drive up the river or something. Like those are the experiences that I'll look back on and think were pretty special.
Also, I wanted to ask about your overall directing approach to the film and what that experience was like of really delving into your directing duties once production began as well.
Yeah, I mean, this style of film that you see with ClayDream is definitely makes sense to me, and I enjoy making films like this, which are a combination of interviews that kind of help drive the narrative, behind the scenes, create shooting our own B-roll. We created some of our own clay animation. This, so I kind of think of it almost like as a collage of bringing all these elements together, and then there's the storytelling side of it, which
Mhm.
obviously is first and foremost. So making those pieces work together. But it's so that's the kind of film that I do like to make, is bring in all these different elements. And what I think was just kind of a gift for this project was there was so much material out there. Will had a great archive that he gave me access to, and that was a good starting point. And then there were a handful of people that worked with Will at his studio that had documented a lot of things too, so I was able to get my hands on a lot of that. And really that to me is the most fun, is just having so much to work with and then trying to just kind of sculpt it all together and come up with a story that is emotional and engaging.
Mhm. And also, speaking about the archives and the clips and footage from his life, what was that experience like of really going through everything that Will maybe had in his archives to really decide which clips to include in the film as
Well, first and foremost, it's just a lot of patience, because it took so long to go through it all. And, because there was so much, so just, that tedious process of just marking all the things that, seem interesting, all the kind of contenders. And what I really enjoyed was most probably about the editing was being able to use a lot of the work and tying it in to the emotional thread of those moments of the film. So not, trying to make this so it's not just a film of, talking heads and interview based, or even later in the film, there's a lot of like courtroom deposition stuff. And that's a very big emotional thread of the film, but it's not as visually interesting to look at. So finding those moments of his clay animation from his career that I felt like visually fit emotionally with what we're hearing. And that was, we had to audition a ton of different pieces in those moments, but I feel like we ended up with things that worked pretty well.
And also, speaking about the editing in general, what was that experience like as well? Really deciding what to put in the final version of the film and what the final story or outline would be overall as well.
Yeah, so there was an outline pretty early on because so much of the story happened in the past. And even though it hadn't really been told, there was this one article that wrote about it a little bit. And then in early conversations with people, I pretty early on, I knew what the general outline was, and kind of how like a 3-act structure might work for the film. But then once we got into the edit, of course, everything inside of that structure is, shifting around at all times. And I love to edit. I love to just sit and, by myself in the basement. That's a lot of fun, but things go to the next level when you've got great collaborators. And so whether it was, my producer Kevin Moyer, who started the project with me, or Jason Rourke, our cinematographer, they were always putting an input. And then ultimately we brought on XYZ Films and Starburns Industries as co-producers, and they really helped take this whole thing to the next level that we wouldn't have been able to do without them. And one of the things that we did was we brought on an editor, Lucas Seller, for about 3 months. And that was a great process. Like there was a lot of things that I want as a director, I wanted the film to be doing that it just wasn't quite doing yet. And so I had to kind of take, my director and editor hats, separate those. And working with Lucas was great. Like he solved the things that I really had a tough time solving on my own, and brought a lot of new ideas to the table that, again, I think, the film was much better off for it.
And also, speaking of working with your DP, what was that experience like of collaborating together to really decide how to visually shoot the film as well?
Yeah. So Jason Rourke is the DP of the film, and we've worked together for quite a bit. We've got a couple other projects too. And so, but really this was like the bulk of the early work that we started to do together was on this film. And a lot of it was the interview. So just deciding like what we wanted these interviews to look like, what, how we wanted to frame them, what we wanted, how wide or tight we wanted them to be. And then the end of the movie is also kind of like, it's almost like the 4th act, is where you see a lot of, footage that we shot, because earlier in the film, it's a lot of archive and it's a lot of the work and everything. So that was just a decision that we wanted that to feel like it's present time, whereas the rest of the movie feels like it happened in the past. So a lot of just creative, conversations together to make sure that we're not just going out and shooting it. We have a game plan, and we're making, we're shooting these things purposefully. And Jason is a great collaborator.
And also, speaking about the interviews, what was that experience like as well, and really deciding who you wanted to maybe speak with or who to include in the film as well?
Yeah, the interviews for me, if I'm making a movie that's going to have interviews, it's always kind of, I'm collecting archives along the way, but really the interviews, I think, is probably what's going to end up driving the narrative in a lot of ways. So I'd like to start with those as much as I can. And had a huge list of people, ended up interviewing over 50 people for the film. I think there's 17 that ended up being included. So that's, a big part of it too, is like deciding how and what to include out of those. And there was a handful of people that I would have loved to talk to that for various reasons decided not to take part. But for the most part, people signed up for it, and that's always a lot of fun because you're getting to meet a variety of super interesting people. And a lot of these people that were at Will Vinton Studios went on to do great things themselves outside of the studio. So it was just really cool to get to talk to these people that had some sort of impact in Will's life and story.
And also, what was the experience like of also producing the film and really maybe balancing your directing and producing duties as well?
It's a good question. It's hard. I mean, and that's kind of how I've done things up to this point, is come up with an idea of a film that I want to direct and get it going. And oftentimes it's hard because we don't have the resources. Like there's no money. There's and so I probably won't do it. I've done a couple films like this now, and I probably won't do it again. Like it's so hard to produce and direct without and then try to like scrape resources and funds and stuff along the way. So moving forward, I want to try to let's get some funding early, and then we can make it. But yeah, and it is sometimes challenging to separate because the producer, even if you're the same person, and the director are going to sometimes have different ideas because there's the art side, but then you got to also be thinking about, okay, well, is this that we want to reach a large audience? So those decisions aren't always in tandem. And I think we kind of explore that in a way in the film, like the art versus commerce side of it. And but I was lucky enough though to have other producers, from Kevin Moyer, like I said, who we started the project together, and then Tamir Ardon from XYZ Films came on for the last couple of years. And between the two of them, they're both, again, great collaborators, and their involvement made the film what it is.
What's the experience been like of being accepted to have the movie premiere at Tribeca and really getting to go to the festival with the movie as well?
Yeah, I mean, Tribeca is one of the best festivals in the world, and it was one from the very early stages that, when we kind of dreamed about where it might premiere, it was one that we had high up on the list. So it's an honor to be part of Tribeca, and I'm just excited for the Tribeca audience to see this film. I mean, I think it's going to surprise people, and it's also it's been 5 years in the making, so it's fun the fact that it's finally going to be out there.
Okay, I think that was mainly it, but thank you again for taking the time out. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. Nice talking to you.
You too. Thanks again. Bye.